Alright, everybody, welcome back. And if you were missing bullying people with the old SRAMs of new power, well, guess what? Gaijin just massively buffed the SRAM this update. It is by far the best part of this patch. And I'm about to get into why, but before we do that, just take a look at this next shot. Now, it's not actually going to connect just because I had to wait until after he fired his missile to make sure it didn't flare it. But look, this almost gets him. If I had fired it half a second earlier, he would have died. And this is a missile at 9.7 facing flareless planes. Just keep that in mind as you're watching this background footage. Anyways, going back to the SRAM, previously this missile was pretty mediocre at best. It was incredible back when it came out, and then it saw some changes and it was left in a state where essentially it was only really usable once you got to about gun range. Like, here's a clip from before the update. This guy is 1.02 kilometers away when I launched my missile, and it straight up cannot get him. Of course, if it was a subsonic, it would have got him there, but still, you get the idea. It had almost no reach, and especially when you were fighting supersonics, it made it very difficult, since both the platforms that use this thing are subsonic. So a lot of the time, you'd be fighting an F-104 or someone like that, and he could just run away. Now compare it to the SRAM in the background right there. That guy was well over a kilometer away. This thing had plenty of range still by the time it hit him. Here's an F4C at 1.4 kilometers behind me, and again, it makes it to him no problem. The range update is by far the biggest thing here, and it makes the SRAM so much more capable than it was previously. The booster change is the big reason for this increase in range, and well, that comes from the fact that the SRAM isn't exactly your typical missile, right? You can probably tell already by the fact that it's in a tube, but it doesn't have your normal fins that do all the guidance work. It is a pure thrust vectoring missile, and that comes with some caveats. One of those being that once it burns out, it can only remain stable for another small amount of time afterwards. So previously, the missile only burned for 3.2 seconds and it blew up at 3.7 seconds. So unlike every other missile in the game where it can coast for a while afterwards, it would just straight up blow up. And a lot of the time, the target would be out of that range if it was more than, say, 1 kilometer away. Well, Gaijin went ahead and lowered the thrust by about half, but they also increased the burn time to 5.75 seconds. And then the missile now only blows up after 6 seconds. Along with that, they also massively reduce the drag coefficient on this thing. These two things put together means that now you have a missile that can actually reach out and touch people. And especially for 9.7, this thing is insane. I would say you now have about, AIM 9J levels of range, and you get 4 of these at a battle rating where you see a ton of flareless aircraft. Gaijin also changed the guidance on this thing. It's quite a bit more agile after that initial starting burn than it used to be. They also went ahead and actually gave the SRAM a G limit now of 45 Gs. Now, it still says 20 on the stat card. I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, and used to it said 20 despite having no G limit at all. But realistically, I don't feel like it makes that much of a difference. I haven't seen any super crazy shots where it is actually pulling 45 Gs to begin with. The bigger buff here is just the range. Because again, you have stuff like this MiG-21S 2.5 kilometers away. Old SRAM would have never been able to hit this, and look at that, it hits it no problem. And you need it because, unfortunately, as you're about to see, guns still aren't fixed. Now, part of this is just my terrible aim with the Harrier because, well, I'm not used to the underslung Aidens. But I also do hit him several times, and I had tried out the high explosive belts here. My mistake, assuming that high explosive shells hitting a plane would actually damage it. And it winds up costing both me and my allied Hunter F6 over there the game. Speaking of, before I get to the caveats in the missile, I do just want to mention that those are the 2 planes this is on. Only the Harrier GR1, which is the premium one, you can pick it up for 9,090 Golden Eagles right now, or the Hunter F6. Now, if you have access to the Hunter F6, that is the much better airframe. I am not a fan of the way the Harrier flies. I highly recommend playing the Hunter F6. But if you just want to get access to these stupid missiles and click on flareless planes with 45G thrust vectoring, pretty good range missiles, well, the Harrier is there. I mentioned some caveats to this missile. Well, of course, still, it doesn't have like the crazy range of something like an AIM 9G, for example, because it does have to basically hit the target while it's burning for it to actually get a kill. There's a couple other things. First of all, if you see in the background, I was not able to fire that missile coming out of the dive because I was going too fast. See, these missiles, like I said earlier, they have these weird pod things, and so if you go over Mach, the game will not let you launch them. It's a pretty unique issue. I don't know any other air-to-air missiles that have a speed limit on them, but it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're trying to deal with a supersonic. The other thing, which is bigger if you ask me, is the SRAAM has always had this tendency to spin itself out. It does seem to happen less often now than it used to, because Gaijin did do some stuff to make it more stable, including giving it an AOA limit now, but it can still do that. The biggest and easiest one to see is whenever you're going slow. Remember, this doesn't have fins, so it has to have airflow going to help stabilize it. If it's slow, it just does that. From my experience, it's been below around like 700, 800 kilometers an hour-ish is where you can start to see the issue. If you're very stable when you launch it, I have had some successful launches from around, 500 to 600 kilometers an hour. It may work. I'm not going to guarantee that it'll spin out every single time, but if you launch it at like 500 kilometers an hour and the missile just freaks out and spins out, you'll know why. It just didn't have enough speed. Next time, launch it a little bit faster and you should be fine. Another thing that can cause this is if the target is passing too fast in front of your nose and the missile has to correct way too fast, like at the very beginning of its turn. In most of your shots, like this one in the background here, you should be fine as long as you give it enough time to correct itself and get stabilized before it hits the target. You should be fine. Though sometimes, even in shots like this, which don't seem that crazy, it still does it. I'm not 100% sure exactly what causes it, because that wasn't anything crazy and the next shot connected just fine. So basically, it still can be a little unreliable at times. So for the most part, if you get a shot on someone within about 1.5 to 2 kilometers and you have some speed, 9 times out of 10 they are just going to explode unless they have flares, because this is a very flare happy missile. It has essentially the same flare resistance as the normal R60, not the M. And the last thing I want to say is, I fully expect these planes to go from battle rating. These missiles at 9.7 are just absolutely insane. These planes should not be at this battle rating with these kinds of missiles. They should not be clicking on sabers and MiG-17s with 45G thrust vectoring missiles like this. The only real saving grace here is that at least they aren't all aspect, but this should not be happening. Gaijin needs to stop doing this. In any case, though, hope you enjoyed the video. Try and enjoy the patch, even though there's not much here, and I'll catch y'all next time. So, peace, y'all.